Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar to discuss why next-level technology is essential for facility management. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by ARC Facilities. Before we get started, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping items. Please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions in the question box in that panel. You can send your questions in at any time for the speakers, and they will be addressed during or after the presentation. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of the control panel. Clicking on that arrow will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access the question box. And if you experience a technical difficulty or have another type of question, you can send a message to us in that question section as well, and someone on our team will answer you privately. Also, please note you'll receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after the webinar, and you can report that to your association for continuing education credits if you'd like. So now we'll move into your speakers today. Today's moderator is Suri Suriyakumar, and he is the CEO of ARC Facilities. In the last 10 or more years, Suri has led ARC to invest in technology to become a leader in access to information in facilities for the built space. And under his leadership, ARC has developed advanced search, OCR, and auto hyperlinking tools for large and small format documents in the facility space. Suri is a frequent speaker and an author of articles and papers in the space of instant access to building information and documents. The guest speaker with us today also is Steve Weikal. He's head of industry relations at the MIT Center for Real Estate. And there, Steve is responsible for managing relationships between the MIT Center for Real Estate and its global network of industry partners and nearly 1,100 alumni of the MIT Masters in Real Estate Development program across 48 countries. Steve is also founder of MIT Real Disruption, a series of conferences to discuss the impact of emerging technology on the real estate industry. So we're looking forward to a nice talk between these two gentlemen, and of course your questions. Please, as I said, send them in at any time and we'll address them during or afterwards. Thank you. Hi, Suri. Welcome. And Steve.
Thank you, Ann. So Steve, let's kick this off. I was listening to an interview you did in Dubai some time ago, and you said, within the real estate segment, we are in an industry that is typically slow to respond. The assets themselves are long-term. Buildings' useful life is 100 years, but you've got technology that changes every day. So what's the impact of that on the build space, Steve? Explain that to our audience.
Yeah, that's a great question, Suri. Suri, good to be here with you, and Neil and Ann, thank you so much for your invitation to speak for Facilities Executive. So Suri, we really had to take a look at the real estate industry where we build these assets to last for so many years, and we finance them. We depreciate them for 40 years. We finance them for 10 and 20 years. And by all of those metrics, we have a very long time horizon in real estate. But technology is changing overnight and happening so quickly. So this digital transformation of the real estate industry that's going on, it does create, kind of a bumpy road sometimes because the approach is so different between the two.
Yeah, I mean that's very insightful. Absolutely. I mean, we do know that in the building industry, we are slow to respond, and it's interesting to see, how that impacts this transformation or the digital impact which is going on. So, Steve,
I think I mentioned to you one time that we have an industry, the largest asset class in the world, a multi-trillion-dollar industry, largest asset class in the world, and a lot of it still runs off of spreadsheets, 41-year-old technology, off PDFs, 25-year-old technology, and frankly runs off clipboards with paper in many cases, which we can talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the whole idea of having this discussion. I thought you have especially given where you are and what you do, you would have a very interesting perspective on that, and that's exactly what we want to communicate with this audience. So, Steve, obviously, COVID has had a huge impact in our lives. We all know that. So, let's discuss what's that impact on the CRETech space, and what is the impact on the CRETech landscape. And then, with all this technology developments going on, how is it impacting the funding? And how are companies dealing with the existing technology and these emerging technologies? I'm sure you'll have an interesting perspective on that.
Yeah, these are all great questions. So as you know, at the MIT Center for Real Estate and in our research labs, we've been following the real estate tech category since probably 2013. And so 7 or 8 years into this cycle of real estate technology, we used to call it disrupting the industry, but really reinventing the industry and transforming the industry in ways that we never considered before. So that was going on and has been going on, and everybody's well aware of that. Sometimes I get the question though, what happened with COVID? Well, there were trends happening prior to COVID, and then COVID accelerated what was going on. So everything got accelerated, and we know that. So the various business models, the flex space, the application of data, all of the apps, that all got accelerated. Now, I will say that the nice to haves sort of fell by the wayside as a result, and the have to haves have become the focus. So as far as the investment going into the space, the investment really has been focusing on those things that are mission critical and those things that have a life after COVID. And so anything that was a bit on the fringes may not have maintained its traction as a result. And this isn't a surprise. What I think is also interesting is the amount of funding. So in 2018, that was a high point of VC funding into what we would call prop tech or real estate tech. And it depends on how you define it, because it overlaps into other areas of AEC tech. But the real estate tech category, generally speaking, was funded at about $28 billion in VC in 2018. Then it dropped in 2019 to 18 billion. And that was due to a couple of things. One, there weren't these huge rounds, especially SoftBank money going into WeWork at billion-dollar valuations. So that dropped a little bit. But surprisingly, it looked like during COVID in 2020, it was going to be a little slow, and that might reflect a slowdown in everything. In fact, 2020 came out at 24 billion. It came out at about a third higher than 2019. So what's that indicate? That indicates that VC was, first of all, recognizing that COVID we were going to get to the other side of COVID. And so we had to play the long game. We had to look longer into the future. But also a lot of new companies got started. And so there were new companies started. Some of the nice to haves may not have made it, but then there was also a convergence going on. It encouraged a lot of these tech companies. There are thousands and thousands of these tech companies trying to solve specific problems in the real estate industry. They were starting to get together. There's starting to be some convergence, some general platforms, some sharing of APIs. That trend was going on, but it got accelerated by the COVID.
Right. It's amazing statistics, Steve, as you say. I was just reading another article just yesterday. According to Twilio, the cloud communications company, the pandemic actually sped up the digital transformation by 5.3 years. They did a deep dive into this, of London office, and interviewed something like 2,500 different companies and found out the pandemic actually sped up the digital transformation, which is already occurring, as we know, by 5.3 years. And they estimate that between 20 and 23, the investment for the transformation will double. So it's really some pretty interesting statistics with regard.
You've also got a bit of an influence on from the economy itself. So we know that a lot of great companies get started when the economy is not strong. And that's as a result of a demand to do more, better, faster, cheaper. And so there were these different dynamics going on, but one is the fact that we need to continue to become more efficient. And I know we're going to talk about data, but as we start further applying data and understanding how to use data to make our industry more efficient and create transparency and remove the friction, that is pushed along by the economy, kind of an old school reason. It just pushes efficiency gets pushed by the economy.
Right. So when that happens, Steve, like you said, there's so much data being, looked at. This is all information. So what really happens? What are the trends? This is going to be a huge data evolution, right? And what are the challenges for the companies and the facility owners, and what are the opportunities here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, I'll try to bring it down to facilities specifically, but let me speak in some high level, at a higher level first. Remember when big data was a thing, right? Everybody was
Uh-huh.
talking about big data. That's
Yeah.
what the headlines were all about, big data. We've got plenty of data now.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's big data doesn't help us. It's really about small and smart data. So
Right.
the startups and frankly the legacy companies and existing companies are getting better at extracting the data. Two types of data. One is outside data to help us with better decision making, and then also extracting the data that we have. I heard somebody describe buildings are really computers with a roof on them. So that was, now think back on some of the older systems that we had in place that generate tremendous amounts of data that might have just been, they might have just been stockpiling the data, banking the data, not quite knowing what to do with it yet, but knowing it was a good idea to
Right.
gather it because you
Right.
can. And also storage is getting cheaper. Data storage has gotten
Sure.
exponentially cheaper over the years. So we've got an opportunity to unlock data from the existing built environment, and that I think is directly related to facilities maintenance and management. But it's still a challenge because the data is dirty, it's inconsistent, it's siloed. We know it lives in a bunch of different places, and so there have been some startups that have worked to figure out how to bridge the data from different data pools, data lakes into a data ocean. And then the tools, the AI and the machine learning and the other tools are becoming easier to use, less expensive, more accessible for the average user to try to extract that data to make decisions. And we have a bunch of startups that are creating that interface to make it easier for all of us. Because frankly, as real estate people, we don't want to futz with the data, right? We just want to know the answers. So there are some great companies that are doing that.
So obviously, Steve, like you said, as real estate people, we want answers, right? And so how does that between, the new buildings? Obviously, everybody's excited about the new buildings. There's a lot of new technologies coming, and everybody's talking about smart buildings. And then, what kind of approach do we require, you think, between the new buildings and the existing environment, which is pretty large?
That's a great question. So we can make the distinction between new buildings and existing buildings. New buildings have the advantage of if for example, the epitome of that right now might be a digital twin. If you start from a digital platform when you design a new building, you're putting in place all of the building blocks to be able to have this incredibly dynamic digital exact duplicate of the building, and you can do a whole bunch of fantastic things with that, and you're gathering data in real time. That's fine, except most of us deal with buildings that are existing. So we have to work to go back and extract the old, sometimes analog data from the existing buildings, and that can involve plugging into legacy systems, or it can involve new startups and new approaches. And just to give you a couple of great examples, I realize that FM doesn't really deal with leases, but one of the early solutions that was very exciting, and the company has subsequently gotten acquired, was a company called Leverton that was able to extract data. They would process piles and piles of leases in the portfolio through complex OCR, and then they would have this huge data set that we never had before because we basically had files and files of paper leases. So the power of being able to extract that information from those leases is jaw-dropping. And so we have other approaches to that. We're intrigued in the lab about some of the new space mapping and asset mapping solutions like iQuery, which is mapping the buildings, Facility One, which is understanding where are all the physical aspects. I mean, if we narrow it down, just where are the physical assets in the building, and do we know who they are and what the manufacturer was and how old they are and how forget about how they're performing, just understanding where they are, right? So there are some companies stepping into that, and then they're plugging into the integrated platforms, whether it's Tririga or they're plugging in, like for example, a Tririga platform, or plugging into the BIM, they're kind of doing BIM modeling as well plugging into the CMMS system. On the asset management, Akita Box, and then Arc Facilities, which your company. These are ways to start digitally connecting the activities in the building, and each of these generate tremendous amounts of data. So we're able to extract the data, and at some point, hopefully, be able to start manipulating that data to be able to better understand how the building is operating. And the last thing I'll say on this is that we're seeing. Remember, I mentioned convergence earlier. These solutions starting to dovetail, plug into Buildium and Appfolio and Yardi. I realize those are different kinds of platforms, but you'll see this going forward, where these new tools will start plugging into the legacy tools, and the legacy companies also are building new tools.
Right. It's very interesting, given especially in the build space, given the amount of build space we have and the size and scope of this space itself, how these things are going to interact. So it's really, really interesting. So we put a piece of statistic here that from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which says 12% of the commercial buildings were built since 2003. So it simply means that 12% of the commercial space is 18 years or younger. If you flip that, right, 88% of the buildings are actually, 18 years or older, right? In fact, our research shows a whopping 30% of the buildings in the United States in the commercial space are over 50 years old. So it's a pretty stunning number. How much of building space we already have, and the build space significantly outweighs the new building space which is coming along.
Correct. So huge opportunity for new solutions to help us get that information to better run our existing buildings, because we're not going to replace everything, clearly, and it's a huge opportunity.
Absolutely true. So that's what led us to the next discussion I would like to talk about, Steve, is that, when we looked into this space and realized how big that is, we started digging into, what really are the challenges in the build space, especially in the older buildings, because like you said, we are not going to wipe out those buildings overnight, and they are all going to be operating, and our problems likely are going to be coming from there. And one simple fact is the operating cost of the older buildings continue to rise. But now, having said that, everything as they get older requires more maintenance, more service, more upkeep. That's understandable, especially with going as old as we know.
And Suri, this is the sweet spot for ARC, right?
Right, absolutely. And this is exactly why we wake up in the morning and do what we do. And what we discovered, Steve, is that there's one element which keeps contributing to this factor. It's just not the fact that the building is getting old, but we found out the more research we did, the more we talked to the customers, and more information we got from the customers as to what the real problem is. But we identified the access to building information seems to be the thorn on the side, which seems to be significantly increasing the operating cost of buildings. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it was a discovery for us for sure.
Right.
So, and the way I would explain that is, it's very interesting. Whether we go to a state-of-the-art hospital or a technology company or a manufacturing plant, what we discovered, Steve, is that literally, every building we go to always have some form of paper still in building information in paper form. Surveys show that in spite of the millions of dollars invested in this space, still building plans and OEM documents are, in most of the companies in hard copy format. Almost 70% of the buildings in the US still have information on paper format. And even when they have digitized the information, it seems like it's sitting in some folder in a desktop somewhere, and it's still hard to access.
I would say, Suri, this is probably consistent across. If you look at leases, if you look at work orders, I mean, we could probably dissect the whole operational ecosystem and find examples of this. What we've learned is that even if it's been, one definition of digital conversion is you scan everything and then you put it in a Dropbox. Well, okay, I agree with that, but on the other hand, you still haven't really extracted any of the data. You've just eliminated the paper medium and you put it into an electronic medium.
Totally. I mean that's exactly what we were going to speak on the next slide. So we found that lots of people, either they have it in paper format or they have successfully scanned them and now they have them in Dropbox box or in some cloud platform. Many of them have them in servers. But that really doesn't do much because you still have to spend hours looking for the information. So think of a facility engineer or a facilities professional, standing on a scaffolding, peering into the ceiling into a broken down air handler of some sort, right? Now he has to come down from the go from building 16 to building number 2 where his office is, and then either look for a piece of paper where the information is stored to find the warranty information or serial number, or actually open up his desktop and hope that in the next 15 minutes he can find that information so he can set up a service call. So if you do that 5 times a day, just the practicality of it sees that it adds hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of operating costs for these buildings. One doesn't realize it until you really dive into this and find out. And that's what we found out, Steve. It's pretty interesting the amount of information which gets locked up in either in digital forms or they are locked up in paper, like you said. Digitizing doesn't necessarily mean you can have access to that information.
And Suri, I would imagine you could make the distinction between something that, this is a perfect slide, because I was going to ask the question, some of this information, it would be okay if you had to go to the office, if you had to look it up on your laptop. But what if it's mission critical? What if something's going on that's mission critical and you don't have the time to go back to the office?
Exactly. So that's a good question. Mission critical can be, if you see in a building, in the build space, there are facility managers who need some information, and sometimes there are risk managers who need information. Sometimes it's emergency or life safety. Sometimes it's compliance. Hospital compliance is such a critical thing. So you need information of all kinds by multiple, departments. And a simple maintenance issue, like a broken water pipe, you need that information right then and there. Unless you have somebody who has been in the building or in the facility for 20, 30 years, Steve, you're going to have to look this information up. And so what happens if that water leak continues? We've found that there are thousands and thousands of cases. There are simple accidents really become catastrophes. Hospitals get shut down, emergency wards get shut down, libraries, tens of millions of dollars worth of damages happen. So it's interesting the lack of information and how it extends to these extensive damages and then eventually results in operating cost.
Mm-hmm. Now, Suri, so in the future, if we have these digital twins, you'd be able to monitor this. You'd know where everything is. Truthfully, we do research on fully automated buildings, fully robotic and automated buildings. You'd have a kind of a control center, and you would just shut that valve down remotely. But that's way in the future. Maybe not way in the future, but it's certainly not how we do it today, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly the challenge we were diving into. So what really happens is, do you have the ability to access this information within seconds? Within really seconds. Mm-hmm. If you take a minute, it's okay, but really definitely not good enough to be, half an hour behind or 2 hours. For example, in that accident which occurred in Phoenix, Arizona, which is at the Burton Bar Library, it's one of the famous libraries in Phoenix, a few years ago. They just had a simple fire, sprinkler break. 3 hours later, they found the shut-off valve, but it flooded all 5 floors completely and cost $10 million damages. Yeah. And the library was shut down for over a year, Steve. So how do you prevent disasters like that? So for that, having information whether in paper or whether you have it in your desktop doesn't really help. So what we found is that technology available today, this is what you were talking about earlier, the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning could actually will allow us to extract this information and have them available so you can really access that information in real time. That is the one which will make the difference, for the facilities professionals.
And Suri, this could be obviously this can get applied at a number of different places within the ecosystem. We could be monitoring with sensors. We could be monitoring valves and machinery and all of the mechanicals throughout the building to better anticipate when they might fail, or to observe whatever the symptoms are that would indicate an upcoming failure. But and so that'll be great. That's when the entire building is digitally connected. But again, we're a long way from that. So there's still a human element. And so I'm assuming this is a tool for the humans to be better at engaging with the built environment until we reach that future, which is still pretty far out.
Exactly. And I really think there is a path to get there, Steve, because the new technologies, which is basically the one you talked about, the artificial intelligence and the machine learning and all that, we'll be able to extract information. The cool part is we are able to now deliver such technology or such information through mobile devices. Now, if you think about the jobs of facilities professionals or anybody who is involved in the built environment, it's not a desk job. They're always on the move. Whether you are looking for compliance, whether it's in an emergency, whether it's life-threatening, or whether it's a regular routine maintenance, or whether it is for risk management, name it, whatever, for security reasons, you always want that information, where you need it, and not necessarily in a desktop locked up somewhere. So, the advent of mobile technologies will actually facilitate us to be able to access that information from anywhere. So that's what we focused on, delivering this technology where they need it, when they need it, on the 8th floor or in the parking garage in building number 15, not really in building number 1 in some desktop. So it's very interesting how we can start build that and find a path to actually making older buildings more efficient and improve the cost of operating those buildings. That's what we are finding, that accessing complex building information from a mobile device with a few taps would be a game changer for the facilities space right now. Right now, we are chasing down hard or desktop.
Sure, this is incredibly difficult. Can you just maybe walk me through the steps? Again, this is a specific solution to a specific problem, which will be replicated across the ecosystem. But you've got paper drawings that over the years changes have been made. They're never consistent with what the physical is. And as you know, there's some startups that are trying to go back in and give you the new, the updated version of the drawings and the plans, and which is not what art does. But walk me through the steps on how do you do this? What are the steps?
Exactly. So there are multiple questions in that, multiple answers to that question you had. One is it's incredibly complex, obviously, to take information which has been there for 10, 15, 20 years, sort them through, index them. And this is where the use of artificial intelligence, you said it so eloquently at the beginning, how the use of artificial intelligence is allowing us to, and machine learning, allowing us to sort through this huge ocean of information. And that's something, because you really don't want a facility manager really going into a plan room and swimming through 20 years worth of data to find out what is current operating close-out documents are. But artificial intelligence can do that within seconds, right? It can sort out and only send the data he wants. So if you think about it like that, what it really is this is a different category of software that in the facility space we need to have to be able to access information. It really doesn't matter whether you're a maintenance engineer or you're a security guard trying to shut off a valve at 11 o'clock in the night, or you are a, administrative assistant who's trying to shut off something in an emergency. Whatever the reason might be, the access to information is a basic fundamental requirement in the built space. And for some reason, that has not been, and obviously in the absence of artificial intelligence and the kind of technologies we have today, we were never able to extract that information and deliver it in a way that it's efficient. But we can do that now. So this group of software, Steve, it's a different category of software, which I think will transform the way how humans will interact with the built space. Does it make sense to you? I mean, how do you see it, Steve?
Yeah, no, I think these are all going to be solutions that make the humans more nimble. And what we could generally say about the digital transformation of real estate is that a lot of the mundane, time-consuming, low-margin activities, or frustrating, frankly, activities, will become automated so that the more strategic, real-time decisions can be made by the human beings.
Right, absolutely. I mean, once we are able to extract this information, wherever they are, whether they're in hard copy or whether they're in digital format, but if you can use the newest tools, technology tools we have, which is mostly cognitive software, and be able to extract that information and deliver it on mobile devices, then from there onwards, you could actually transform this to, how, like I said, the human behavior itself will start changing. Because right now in our personal life, Steve, we do so many things off mobile devices, which we didn't do 5 or 10 years ago, 5 years ago, which we are starting to do now. I think that we're going to see that more and more. And this kind of lays the groundwork to get there. This is the next generation of technology which will lead us there. So imagine, for example, if you can ask Alexa or Siri where the shut-off valve is. That would be pretty cool, don't you think so?
Yeah, well, we're already starting to see some of that. You've got the Cisco solution and the Alexa for Business, and yes, we will have this voice integration and voice interface to be able to have this smart building, this computer with a roof on it. You'll be able to talk to it the way you talk to your mobile phone, and have it do things, which will be pretty great. The other thing I might note is that the transformation is being pushed along by I know that some people like to say it's a generational thing, but we all are getting used to cars on demand through Uber, hotel rooms on demand through Airbnb, dog walking on demand, food ordering on demand, everything on demand. Yet when we're running a building, we have to go to a desktop and sort through a bunch of files, or worse yet, we have to go to that locked room in the basement that has racks and racks filled with paper rolls, and there's kind of a disconnect. So I think there's pressure just from the way we live our lives, and expectation that it will have to become easier to engage with the built environment. It's inevitable.
Right, and that's exactly why that research Twilio published, the cloud communications company, about how the transformation has sped up during COVID is pretty interesting, Steve. If you think about it, we thought COVID put us behind in our lives. Well, when it comes to digital transformation and the facility space, I think we have less people on the ground these days for whatever reason, and we had to learn to operate with less people because of pandemic conditions, social distancing, etc., etc. Right. We really don't want to be peering over somebody else's shoulder into a drawing. I can't think of a document storage room which can have social distancing capabilities. There's barely enough room to shove another roll of drawing there, right, as we see it in the facility uses. So there are so many things which is going on, but I really think this transformation, and with this kind of investment which is going on, this is almost a new category of software. But
Suri,
like you said,
Suri, you say that's a new category of software, which I agree with. Can you just add a little color to? We do have IoT systems. Our buildings are not dumb. Some of them are, but we've come a long way. So we've got sensors, and we've got systems. We've got legacy systems. We've got CMMS and IWMS and BMS and all the MSs. though.
Yeah.
So our buildings are not dumb, but I know we're
Yeah.
still struggling with how to get them to talk with one another, and there are still blind spots that they have. Can you speak a little bit about that continuum?
Absolutely. I mean, so that's exactly what our discovery shows. In spite of the fact that we do have lots of CMMS, 180 plus companies provide CMMS software for the facility space. And then we have significant amount of BMS software. And then, we have, other softwares related to smart buildings, like you said. But in spite of all that, we walk into a hospital or we walk into a technology company where there is basic technology going on in the building, but when you have a shutoff valve breakdown, we just can't find the shutoff valve. That's the amazing part. So what has happened is this aspect of access to building information is the category which has not been addressed for obviously for decades, for the lack of the technology not being available to create that category. And we've been able to create that category in getting that information, because once you get that information, that access to information is critical for the people who use CMMS software and for the people who use BMS software, right? It doesn't matter what software you're using, because those softwares primarily are managed for maintenance. It's management software. This is really a field software, technician software, or a first responder might need this software. So the category of software is actually for field technicians to use it when you want to find something then and there. CMMS is more management software, or a building management solution is more to do with data being collected. It's all about management. But when it comes to, accessing building information, it's really something that you should be able to access on the go from wherever you are, Steve. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it does. Now, I don't know that you'll be. I'm sure you're not willing to reveal the secret sauce, but help me understand how I get from piles of rolls of paper to suddenly in my handheld device while I'm standing under the sprinkler head that has failed, and I'm able to find the shutoff valve through my device. How did you get the paper to the interface that gives me that power?
Right. So, I mean, it's more than the secret sauce. It's the 30 plus years of, toiling with construction documents and information and getting paper cuts, handling all these large documents. That's what happens, Steve, over a period of time. So we've been in this space for a long time. So we have the ability to go walk into a document storage room, which is, completely, it has, paper documents, has digital documents, CDs, DVDs, you name it. I mean, there's all kinds of media out there. But we're able to take all that and upload it into a system. And if it is in a hard copy, we just scan it and upload them. But once you do that, where we really make the difference is our software. We actually have a couple of patents. We have developed software where we can actually have advanced optical character recognition, which will actually read all these 50, 60, 70-year-old drawings, extract the information, and put it in a way that, when people want it, you can deliver that on the fly. So that's what happens. But because of our experience, we can actually accomplish that most difficult part. The most difficult part is going down to that document storage room, where sometimes you have hundreds of thousands of sheets of drawings, sitting there for 10, 15, 20 years. People are scared to touch it. But we do that, very comfortably, take them, scan them, upload them, because we do have the technology to be able to read a drawing which is maybe 75, 100 years old. In fact, some of the buildings we work in are, for example, an organization like yourself, the MIT, where you have an institution which has been around for a long time. And we do have documents which we are able to read and extract that information. Once you do that, then technology does the rest, the magic.
Right. We put a man on the moon, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are a couple of rooms filled with old plans. So you have this complex optical character reading, which digitizes the figures on the page. That has to get cleaned up, which takes tremendous amount of work. to convert that kind of visual data, that analog data, into the digital data. And from there, I think that area, there are a lot of smart people and a lot of brilliant people figuring that out. But I'm always intrigued by how do we get from the analog paper into the digital dynamic world. And that's a little bit like the company Leverton that I mentioned to you a number of years ago. They were able to crack some of that open and create that power that, of course, has subsequently gotten much more sophisticated.
Yes, the difficulty in this space is because the existing information is in a hard copy format, or it's also locked up with so much other operations and maintenance manuals and other inspection reports in hospitals, which are very critical for their compliance and so on and so forth. They all mix together. But as you can see, I'm putting up in the screen, there are different groups of software, but this particular software is emerging, and when this happens, it will transform how humans interact with building information in the future, because now you can be on the scaffolding, peering into a ceiling, looking at a broken down air handler, and you, with your phone, scan the QR code there. Right away, Steve, you'll be able to find out the serial number, or, when it was last maintained, or who services. You can actually stand on the scaffolding and still make that service call. Yeah. So the idea is, can we facilitate that? But like you said, I mean, you gave a perfect example, whether it's using Uber or Airbnb, the new technologies, we are all getting very comfortable with it. And this is what's going to transform. Mobile technologies will have transformed our personal lives. So there is no reason it shouldn't do the same thing in the facility space as well.
Yeah, and Suri, I've got a question about one of the earlier slides that you had, but I do want to invite everybody to send in questions on Q&A because I'm sure there are plenty of questions out there, and I've asked a bunch of my own questions, but I want to hear from the other attendees as well. But Suri, a question. Well, actually, I'll hold off on the question. Do we want to bring Anne back in?
Sure, absolutely. Anne, you're there. I think. Like Steve said, it'd be interesting to find out whether anybody has any questions for Steve or myself, and we can take them now.
Yes, I am here. Thank you. And thanks, gentlemen, for that discussion. And we definitely covered a lot of ground there. And, ending up with the building plans and information management category on that previous slide, I think was a good dovetail to the conversation. So we do have some questions. I will talk about, I'm going to dive into this question first. And it's, we already have plans digitized as an example. And Steve, you had mentioned, where an example of that could be where you scan something and you put it into Dropbox. And, many folks are doing that, of course, having digitized plans. So then the question led to, will the system here that you talked about, that ARC Facilities specifically offers, will a system like this make a difference? How does that go beyond the digitization that may already be in place? How does this bring it all together?
You want to take that, or you want me to take that?
Well, sir, you can start, and then I'll add some gloss to it.
Sure. Absolutely. So that's a good question. Many people ask us this question. We have already digitized the information. We already have them in desktops or whatever. So that's very good. That's a first step. Many people don't do that, but once you do that, that still doesn't mean you can access that information within seconds. In no building we went to, they didn't have the information. They always had the information. It's just that accessing them when they wanted it in an emergency, or when they are out there in the field, was the challenge. They eventually found the information. It's just that they found them after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. So if you scanned and have all of the information on the desktop, that's good. That's the first step. But it doesn't facilitate instant access. What this category of software would do is facilitate instant access to whoever who wants it.
Yeah, so Suri, the question I had was about, you showed the slide that had the different, all the different MSs, and I'm wondering how how far are we from having those systems talk to one another, aside from
Right.
new tools plugging into them like Arc and the others that I mentioned? But have we made progress on getting those systems integrated yet, or is it still pretty fundamental about the problems, not problems, the challenges we need to resolve?
I think the latter is true. I think the challenges will be resolved. I think we are going towards that as companies continue, like you said, Steve, the old technology and the new technology, how the convergence is occurring. More and more companies are talking about all this information we have, but how do we really bring them on a mobile cloud platform so that it can be accessed anytime? And I think over a period of time, once the category starts evolving, more people will find ways to connect technology. Technology is amazing, and I'm sure we'll find a way to connect them. But right now, what happens mostly with the CMMS systems or BMS systems, because they are desktop-based, they are server-based technology. The kind of technology which is evolving, what we are talking about, is mobile and cloud-based technology, which is on a different platform. But there would be, transformations happening where all of this information can be done over the years. I don't know of a whole lot going on right now, but companies are starting to look at mobile interfaces and being able to connect with other mobile devices.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that the established enterprise solutions, and even if you go to the websites, you can see they've already made progress on integration and mobile solutions. But there's always white space in the map where we can add technology in to make things just a little bit easier to do. So there's always going to be opportunity for new players to come into the space.
Absolutely. I think one of the things which Steve, coming from what you just said now, what has happened to us, especially with the mobile technology, is everything has become easier. Everything has come to a stage we have access to whether we want to get directions, or like you said, whether we want to order coffee, get a boarding pass, find out what the weather is, or get the latest course, listen to the music. We've gotten used to doing that with 3 taps or 4 taps on our phone. So I think people are looking to do that more and more. That's the transformation which is happening, where human behavior is changing to that kind of environment. Instead of sitting on the desktop and hitting the search button, now they want to tap it, get the information. I'm getting used to that. So this is where the next platform of technology is going to help facilities professionals who are on the move access this information very easily and comfortably.
Right. Anne, do you have another one?
I do. And the question is, it's kind of going into the practical standpoint of this, the mobile option that you're talking about here for all this data together. And the question is, for the ARC facility system that you've been talking about, how long does it take to get the system up and running is the question. I realize that that's a very specific question depending on the organization, but I'm taking that as the question being, briefly, what is that process? And Suri, I suppose that would be for you, obviously. What is that process? Obviously, we have a ton of information. That's what you gentlemen have been talking about. Existing buildings, maybe bringing in new construction in. Can you kind of just briefly talk, Suri, about that process, that onboarding process for facility managers?
Sure. I mean, that's a question which comes up all the time, and understandably so. So it's not an uncommon question. So the short answer is it all depends. But again, I'll give a little more color. So if you take a building which is 50 years old or 75 years old, we might actually find it a little, we might need a little more time to bring that on board as against a building which was built 15 years ago, because you'll probably have less information and probably more clear information. But the way we think about that is, if you take 1 million square feet, of built space, depending on the type of the building, whether it's old or new, you're really looking at about 2 weeks, week to 2 weeks. If it is a building which is 20 years old or 10 years old, you have all the information in one place. That's a slam dunk, because scanning most of the building, if it is 10 or 15 years old, you probably have 40–50% of it already in digital form. So we'll scan the rest and push everything to the cloud. And once we push everything to the cloud, it's out of our hands. Then the software goes to work, which obviously is much faster. But if you have a building which is, let's say, 40 years old or 50 years old and drawings are all over the place, it takes a little bit more professional services on our part to organize them and get rid of the stuff we don't need and really put them in place. About 2 weeks maybe, for about 1 million square feet in space is generally my estimation.
Hey, Suri, related to that, is there and maybe there's a broad answer to this and then a specific ARC answer. We've been talking about solutions that potentially are very expensive and would be great for somebody who has budget. But what if it's a small portfolio? What if it's a single building? Do you think there are still opportunities if I'm a property owner, a facilities manager on a single building, not a big expensive global portfolio? Can I still make my life easier?
So right now, our focus has been the commercial properties, Steve. So we basically look at buildings which are 50,000 square feet and bigger. Usually, commercial properties, even the smaller buildings, tend to kind of fall into that. But anything smaller than that, I'm sure we can apply the same equation and get the information. It will be easier and faster. We haven't focused in that space, but it's certainly something that one can do, or another company can develop solutions, and they should over a period of time. I know of a few other companies trying to develop solutions to keep all of the information related to even residential properties in one place where you can easily access it. But that's much easier with a Dropbox or a box. You could have all of your information in one place and you can find it fast because it's not too complex. But once you go past that, 300, 400,000 square feet, and as the building ages and you do tenant improvements and you do extensions, upgrades, modifications, that's when the challenge arises with regard to accessing this information.
Right. Andy, you have another one?
I do, and I think we'll wrap it up with this one. Let's see, unless we get another in. Let's see. I'm going to ask you though about cybersecurity, because that's another definitely a point of concern in all technology these days. So the question is, and for both of you, of course, with your experience, what about security? Mobile data can certainly be hacked, and of course, with all the MSs, as you've mentioned, Steve, that's all taken into account individually, by company, by organization, of course. But talking about this new category and kind of bringing it all together with the convergence of all this data, what about the security with this type of next leap in data management?
Steve, you want to take that?
Yeah, yikes is all I can say. These are all, talk to me about any category that we follow, and it's the one of the elephants in the room. And there will always be, the more digital we get, there will be this constant battle between the good guys and the bad guys, and we can never overlook the importance of that. Suri, that's kind of a general response. I think you would have a direct experience with this, I think.
Yes, it's not uncommon for people to ask that and feel nervous about the fact, now at least I have it locked in a room and you're taking this and putting this on the cloud. Oh my God, what's going to happen? And I can understand that. But if you step back and look at the larger landscape of what we are doing in our own lives and how this digital transformation is just not impacting the facility space, but every bit of space, is that, like Steve, like you said, this risk is always going to be there. So even if you had it locked up, if you had a flood, if you had a tornado, if you had a earthquake, you put that information at risk. It doesn't mean that risk was created now. The risk was always there. And in addition to that, you couldn't access that information. The difference is once you have that on a digital platform, you have a different kind of a risk. And, you have hackers going around and there's ransomware which is going around. There's all kinds of different risks, different kinds of risks. But that doesn't stop us from transforming into the space. I mean, if you look at the complex banking software we have, I do quite a bit of my banking on mobile now because it's convenient. And, talk about, 5.3 times acceleration, 5.3 years of, how the transformation has sped up. I actually sped up my own personal experience, whether I'm shopping or buying something or doing banking transactions. It is all changed. Am I worried about it? Yes. Yikes is the answer, Steve. I worry about it all the time. But we do really highly complex, very high-level security operations on the digital front. I mean, we work with the Department of Defense in some drawings and documents, and we work with healthcare data, which has to be HIPAA approved. That's moving around. And then there is banking information and financial transactions. If you work with any military organization, you have the same risk. So I think the risk is always there, but I think increasingly it's a battle between the good guys and the bad guys, like Steve said, and we'll continue to build better security, and which is definitely happening now. But I don't think that should stop us from doing the transformation or going towards the transformation, because we're going to be significantly better off having digital information than have them in hard copy of paper.
Agreed. And I misspoke. I have one last question to ask you. And Suri, I'm going to direct it to you. Of course, Steve, weigh in afterwards if you wish. And the question is something that many facilities folks run into. I know I've run into it with my own home. So, well, not the digitization part, but the discovering things after the fact when you start opening walls. The question is, though, when you digitize documents, so with the ARC Facilities tool, when you digitize documents, do you verify their accuracy? Are you able to verify that they're up to date? For example, an older building has had renovations, and it's unclear whether the documents reflect the building's current conditions. So I assume you've run into that with your clients. And any comment on that, Suri?
Yes, all the time. So we do have situations where people will get drawings and they'll say, "Oh, we don't have the latest set of drawings." So there are two ways you can do that. We can create the set of drawings, but one of the important aspects we do is we try to identify the missing drawings and tell the property owners these drawings are missing because we can't find these shut-off valves. So that's where the physical inspection and seeing the property and understanding what they have and making sure that it's correctly married into the information they have is critical, especially for the current operations in terms of daily operations, not historical data. You could have all kinds of historical data, but for the daily operations of maintenance and managing, running the facilities, you really want the current main building information. And so when we actually access and upload this information, we would be able to tell them, look, you don't seem to have the latest set of closeouts, and we'll be able to identify that.
And Suri, I think this is where some of the new young companies that are they're doing space mapping and physical asset mapping using robots and LIDAR and all of the other general purpose technologies applied to the built space. This would be a possible solution to that, because that's also a very labor intensive process where you heck of walk around and poke your head up through the drop ceilings and look around. So that's an exciting separate area of understanding what we're currently dealing with.
Exactly. We actually have companies, they would say, we have absolutely no drawings for these buildings, and we would have to laser scan them and recreate the drawings. And from there onwards, then you need to build the information with regard to shut-off valves or emergency accesses from there onwards. That it's not uncommon for that to happen. It's time-consuming, but it's doable.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate that wide-ranging discussion, both with your presentation and the Q&A. Really appreciate it. Thank you both.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Suri.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much.
And thank you, of course, to our attendees for attending and for your attention and for your questions for those of you who sent them in, and ARC Facilities for presenting the webinar today as well. A recording of today's presentation will be sent out to You can reference the ideas discussed today. Look out for that. It will also be made available on our magazine's website in the future. at facilityexecutive.com. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.